And good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible here on Fulfilled Radio. I appreciate you being with us. And as you can see, for our very first time, the two of us, Daniel Rogers and I, are on video together. Several people had mentioned to me that they wish that we would do video, and I know I do it. I did a video here recently and had several comments about it. And I know that Daniel filled in for me for a couple of weeks here at the close of the year. And so, here we are in living color. Yeah, that is color, is it? Yeah. So anyway, we'll see how this works. And by the way, before we get there, those are real books in the back of Daniel there. So see, there you go. Those are real books. And I would normally do this program from my office, and I have books there too. But nonetheless, I was actually supposed to have somebody here at the house about 45 minutes ago, and I was waiting on them. Naturally, they didn't call, they didn't text, they didn't do anything. They just didn't show up. So that's kind of the way that is. And they were supposed to buy some car parts from me. And that's what I encounter an awful lot in dealing with people, and it's really frustrating. But it seems that people, how do I express this kindly? An awful lot of people seem to think that because it's video, it's not real live, that they don't owe you any decorum, they don't owe you any courtesies, and it's like, what do you do that for? I don't understand. But anyway, that's the reason I am sitting here in my living room, and I had to adjust my camera. I had to close my shades. I've got a big picture window in the background. And let me tell you, it was really, really bright. So I'm doing the very best that I can to block that off. Maybe I could do this and it would help a little bit. I don't know. So anyway, Daniel, great to be back with you. Did you have a great Christmas? Was Santa Claus good to you and all that?
He was. Santa Claus basically gave us a new house and 30 years of mortgage payments.
There you go.
I know, but Santa Claus was great. It was a lot of fun. Caden, he was a year old. He was almost a year old when he had his first Christmas. But this one was a lot more fun because he was way more into it and excited about the presents, So we just had a blast. How about yourself?
Oh, well, my wife and I got to travel to Arkansas, and we got to visit our grandkids. We only get to see our grandkids at the most 3 times a year, unless something special happens. And so we were able to go to Bentonville, Arkansas, and had just a really, really wonderful time. Our grandkids are both really into Christmas. I can tell you that. I don't know why they have every toy that's ever been manufactured. They don't need one single thing, but of course, being kids, they absolutely love to open packages, and so we really enjoyed our Christmas. And we went over there a week early, and then when we came back, our son, who seldom comes home, and certainly not just to visit, and sit down and talk and what have you, but he came and spent the day, Christmas Day, with us. So we had a really good time. It was very enjoyable. And then on the New Year's, of course, December 31st is my birthday, and so I spent the day in mourning, But it is what it is. I told some people who were telling me, they said, "You're actually turning 72?"
Oh.
I said, "Well, yes." But I said, I'm trying to look at it like this. If you took the numbers in my age and just flipped them around, I would only be 27 years old.
Yeah, that's right.
And not that I necessarily feel like I'm 27, mind you. And that gets increasingly so every single day, it seems. But nonetheless, just spent a really easygoing, relaxing time. During the 2 weeks, I got to work on one of my old vehicles that I'm trying to fix up to sell. So, yeah, had a very, very relaxing 2 weeks.
Great, yeah. Here at the church, we actually closed the office for 2 weeks, so I was at home the entire time. Got to do some painting and some just moving and unpacking. So that was a lot of fun too. Plus, spend time with Laura and the baby. It's always
Yeah.
always a treat.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
of course,
Absolutely.
it was 75 going on 80 on Saturday here in Alabama, and then on Sunday evening we got snow.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit like it was here in Ardmore on Saturday morning. I went out and I worked on the old pickup, and it was in the 70s, just super, super pleasant. Saturday night, a front came in and it got all the way down to 14 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah, we didn't have any snow, thankfully.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I go to the office every single day. I mean, even though it's Christmas and New Year's and what have you, I'm at the office 7 days a week. My wife says I'm at the office 10 days a week, but that's just kind of the way I'm geared. And I want to tell you, the old building where my offices are, it was built in 1923, 1925, somewhere along in there. Needless to say, it does not have central heat and air.
Mm.
Its heat is provided by boilers,
Oh
steam,
wow.
yeah, steam boilers in the basement. And they really, really, really cut back on staff due to COVID a couple of years ago. And as a result of that, the guy who's in charge of maintenance, and he's an absolutely fantastic guy. He and I have become friends, very helpful, but they just working to death. There are times when he forgets to turn the boilers on and it turns cold.
Oh no.
And about 2 years ago, we had a bitter, bitter snap of weather. And I got to my office that morning, naturally expecting that I've got nice, warm, cozy heat in my office, and you could blow steam in my office.
Wow.
I just turned around, closed the door to my office, came back home.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's just like, no, I'm not going to do this. And so I called him. His name's Charlie, and I said, "Hey, Charlie, I'm not going back to the office until I've got some heat in there." So
Right.
he actually contacted me about a week and a half ago, and he said, "Now, Don, we're supposed to have several days of heat here, 70s, even 80s." So he said, "I'm going to turn the boilers off," and I said, "Okay, that's fine, but keep in mind we've got a bitter cold front coming in as well." So I said, "Do not let me get cold, Charlie." He said, "No, I won't do that to you again."
Oh boy.
So, it was still a little cooler than I like when I got to the office yesterday morning. My goodness, or Sunday morning as well.
Yeah.
So Sunday and Monday and this morning, it was between 15 to 17 degrees outside. And
Whoa.
yeah, Sunday morning it was actually 0 when I got to
Wow.
the office. And
Wow.
needless to say, I was like, okay, if it's not 70 degrees in my office, I'm not staying. That's all there is to it. But it was
Yeah.
nice. I've got a little one of those little small space heaters there in my office, sit right behind my chair, and I can turn around and warm my hands up very, very easily.
Yeah.
But
You can't type. You can't type with cold
yeah,
fingers.
absolutely. So anyway, Charlie's done a good job, and it's been very pleasant in there. And now I think the latter part of this week it's supposed to be back up in the 60s, mid low 70s.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, ours was, it was 80 degrees in some places in Alabama. And
Yeah,
then just overnight, it dropped to about 50 something. And then Sunday evening, it just started to snow. We had probably 4 or 5 inches of snow in our yard, which is crazy.
my
Um,
goodness.
yeah, luckily, none of the roads froze over. The ground was too warm for it to
Oh
do
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you know, so I was able to come into the office and everything today. But yeah, it's been crazy, crazy weather, almost apocalyptic.
Oh my. Oh yeah. Well, hey, it's due to global warming. I mean, all of
Oh
this
yeah.
cold weather is due to global warming.
Well, it
And
was global. It was global warming on Saturday and global freezing on Sunday.
yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine about all this craziness. And I said, I well remember during the 60s, Newsweek, Time, the global ice age is coming. We've only got 8 to 10 years before Earth freezes over and we relive the ice age, and life as we know it is going to come to an end.
Wow.
And now, oh, wait a minute. So the ice age didn't happen, so it must be global warming. It's, right. The powers that be thrive on fear.
Yeah, just like in church.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you can get people afraid, you can get them to do just about anything.
Yeah. And that
brings or give any amount of money.
Oh, yeah. I'll never forget one of my nephews, a truly sad testimony. He left the church completely, and having a conversation, actually to go back previously, before he ever left the church, he was actually caught shoplifting. Real minor stuff. But I talked to him about it. I said, why in the world would you do that? And he said, well, I don't really know. And I said, you know better than that. He said, yeah. And he said, I can't believe I did it, because he said, the idea of hell just absolutely scares me to death. I said, well, okay, then why would you do such a thing? Well, in later years, he completely left the church. And he said on one occasion that the reason he did is because he lost his fear.
Wow.
And when the only thing that you have as an attachment to Jesus Christ is fear, fear can very, very, very often lose its sharp edge. And it's just a sad thing.
Yeah, whereas love never fails.
Yeah. So it's just like a really sad situation.
It is. It's like when a parent says they're going to discipline their kid. You do this and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And then the kid does it. I'm going to do it next time. I'm going to get you next time. Then he does it again, and I'll get you the next time. Eventually, the kid just does whatever he wants because there's no repercussions for their actions. And the same thing's true with people in church. When you hear that the rapture's coming any day, and you've got to prepare, and you've got to do good, and you got to do right, or God will strike you down or whatever, and it never happens, and it never happens, and it never happens. Eventually, you just get to the point where might as well do whatever I want, because these religious folks, haven't been right yet, so why should I listen to them?
Yeah, my emails, I constantly get emails from people who had become so disillusioned at the failed prophecies, particularly obviously of the dispensational camp and the constant false predictions. This is the generation. 1980s countdown to Armageddon. 88 reasons why the rapture will be in 1988. Oops, 89 reasons why the rapture will be in 1989. And on it goes. And I haven't done a great job of saving emails and testimonials like that, but of people who had lost their faith, but to have come to an understanding of covenant eschatology, fulfilled eschatology, and their faith has been renewed. They're in love with the Lord again, and the joy that they're feeling is just almost unbounded. So it's so sad when you encounter people like that. When you encounter people that are still living in bondage to that kind of fear. And I will remember as a young man living at home, and my dad was not what you would call a hellfire damnation preacher. Okay, he would preach on hell, but that was not his focus. My dad really was. He was a little bit of a iconoclast in the Churches of Christ, because he taught grace an awful lot, and as a result of that, he got in lots of trouble with the powers that be, because in the fellowship circles in which we traveled, grace is something you talked about. It's not something you experienced or extended.
Yeah, that's right. You only every time you talked about grace was to talk bad about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, nonetheless, growing up in those circles, even though he did not speak on hellfire an awful lot, I was very, very fearful of hell. And, I mean, Paul used judgment as a motivating factor. Knowing, therefore, the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So anyway, I'll never forget this, Daniel. I was probably 15 years old, and I was having a guilty conscience about some of the things I'd been doing and what have you. And we lived in a house that was set on a great big, huge, long, sweeping curve. And I had red curtains in the window of my bedroom. I was literally laying awake, struggling with my conscience one Saturday night. Someone came from the west, their headlights hit my red curtains, lit up my room in red. And I absolutely knew this is it. It's over. I'm doomed.
Wow. Yeah.
I was literally terrified. The adrenaline rush that went through me of fear. And the very next morning at church, I walked right down the aisle.
I bet. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But an awful lot of people live in that kind of fear. And it's not the foundation for a life.
No.
And again, Paul believed in the terror of the Lord.
Sure.
Paul believed in separation from God as an eternal reality, something to be feared. But at the same time, that was never the key focus of his ministry.
It's interesting. In 2 Corinthians 5, where he says that, knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. Knowing the terror was something that he knew, that he realized as a Christian. He knew the significance of life, but he also knew the terrors of death. But what he says on down is that he wasn't controlled by terror. He says that we are that he was controlled by the love of Christ in verse 14. The love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. So although he knew the terror of the Lord, and he used that as some motivation for wanting to reach people with the gospel, the ultimate thing that controlled him in his life was the love of Christ. We can have knowledge of the what happens when someone rejects Jesus, while not allowing that to be the controlling factor in our life.
I have used 2 Corinthians chapters 4 through 5 for many, many, many years, because psychologists tell us that there are three motivating factors. There's some subsets to each one, but there are three motivating factors for every human being. Number one, the promise of reward, the offer of reward. Number two, fear of judgment, or something associated with it, or love. Well, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, what did Paul do? We know that we have in heaven an eternal and abiding inheritance, a house of God not made with hands.
Right.
We do not look at the things that are seen, but at the things that are unseen. The things that are seen are temporal. The things that are not seen are eternal. And so here in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 16 and following, Paul appeals to that promise of reward as a motivating factor. Then in 2 Corinthians 5, he uses the reality of judgment.
Right.
But he concludes, as you just read from 2 Corinthians 5:14, he concludes with the love of Christ. And I personally prefer the translation of constrains us.
Oh, yeah, constrains. Yeah.
For we thus judge that if one died for all, then all were dead. So that henceforth those who live should not live unto themselves, but unto the one who died for them and rose again. So here is Paul, who was not a, quote, psychologist, but he was inspired by the Holy Spirit, who knows the hearts and the minds of God, the motivating factors of God and of man. He uses the three known motivating factors of all mankind. You promise me something, okay? Or you threaten me, but most of all, if I love you, that changes the whole ballpark.
It does. Reward and punishment, those are, sort of greedy motivators, whereas love is a selfless motivator. When you think about it, punishment and reward only work as long as the person believes that the punishment or the reward outweighs whatever it is that they want. But love, it overcomes all of that. It's like with kids. You can promise a kid a cookie, but if jumping off the slide from the very top like they want to do is worth more to them than the cookie, they're going to do what they want.
But oops, that hurt. That didn't work too well.
Yeah, that's right. But that's a very good point. And whenever we reduce the gospel to simply reward versus punishment, it basically makes it to where, as long as you say the right thing and do the right thing and pray the right prayer and are baptized in the right way, then ultimately who you are on a day-to-day basis doesn't matter as much, as long as you check off those boxes.
I will. There have been two occurrences in my life. I mean, there are many, many more, but two have stood out to me. An elder in the church, I won't mention where or names or anything, but during a break, if you please, between class and service, this elder caught me in the office, and he thought that I ought to already be in the auditorium. And by the way, he was a self-appointed hall monitor. This particular elder, he literally did nothing but walk the halls during classes, making sure that everyone else was in class, but he was never in class.
Right.
Self-appointed. And he and I were talking ever so briefly in the office, and just almost out of the clear blue sky, he said, well, what really, really matters is that we're here at the building during the 3 appointed times. And if we're here at the building at the 3 appointed times, then we're okay with the Lord. And I was like, holy cow! I've never heard such legalism in all of my life.
No, wow.
And the other occasion was a woman. She and her husband were very, very faithful in attendance Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, right? And I had come to understand that Hebrews chapter 10, 25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, so much the more as you see the day approaching. I had come to understand that day and the assembling there was not Sunday.
Right.
And it wasn't Sunday night, and it wasn't Wednesday night.
Or a gospel meeting.
And I guess I can put it like this. I made the mistake of preaching on that. and saying we have no mandate for Sunday night or Wednesday night at all. And this woman came up to me and she said, Don Preston, and we were very close friends, are you telling me the Bible doesn't command me to be here Sunday night and Wednesday night? And I said, well, that's technically correct. And she said, all of my life I've been living and coming to church every Sunday night, Wednesday night because I thought there was a command that I had to do that.
Wow.
And I saw the train coming, And I said, well, yes, that is technically correct. I don't remember a single time after that she and her husband showed up on Sunday night and Wednesday night.
Oh, man. They didn't get it, did they?
They just did not get it. Of course, I had tried to explain to her that our motivation should be that we want to be with the saints. We want to worship the Lord. We want to learn more, whether that be Sunday night or Wednesday night, or whether that be whatever it is. We want to be with brethren, to worship the Lord, to learn more, to go closer to Him. And she was just beside herself to learn that we don't have a command for Sunday night, Wednesday night.
You know, the only reason she probably came on Sunday morning is because she thought there was a command to be there on Sunday morning.
That's exactly the reason she came on Sunday morning.
So you didn't stand up and preach that lesson, did you?
No, I didn't.
Wow.
It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
How legalistically driven some people are. Now, obviously, I don't believe that all people are, but but some people are so legalistically driven that unless they have, thou shalt attend service Sunday morning 10 to 11:30, that they just don't think anything about it.
Right.
So, and what that means is that fellowship with the saints, worshiping and learning is not a high priority at all with them.
No.
Just being at a geographical location and being within the walls of the temple of God.
Which makes you have so much appreciation for the Ethiopian eunuch. Because he was someone who couldn't go into the temple as a eunuch. He had to stay in the outer courts. And yet he still went year by year and read his prophets on the way home. No wonder he was so ready to accept the gospel when he heard it. I mean,
I think and I was talking to Holger Neubauer about this on the phone just the other day. I gave a lesson some years ago, and it was in my series on Acts and the restoration of Israel. And I've been going back over that material because I'm currently writing a book on the last day, the last hour, the last trumpet resurrection. And my premise is this, and I don't want to take too much time sharing on this, but it has absolutely to do with the Messianic temple. As you just pointed out, under Torah, the eunuch was not permitted into the assembly of Israel. They couldn't go into the tabernacle. They could not go into the temple. That's Deuteronomy chapter 23. And so they were outsiders in the extreme, along with foreigners who were not permitted into the court of Israel. Well, pardon me, in Acts chapter 8, you have this Ethiopian eunuch who's been to Jerusalem to worship. And it's just like you said. He couldn't even go into the court of Israel. That's it. He had to stay in the court of the Gentiles on penalty of death if he got any closer. And so he loved the Lord so much that year after year after year, he traveled from Ethiopia up to Jerusalem, which is no small journey, folks. Let me tell you, that's a long way, especially in a chariot. He was not driving a late model SUV. And so he made that journey, and the Lord brings Philip to him. And this dawned on me some years ago, and it's the reason I presented the lesson. We know that Philip began at the same scripture, which was Isaiah 53. But, pardon me, I am absolutely convinced that Philip did not stop at Isaiah 53. He went all the way through chapter 56. Isaiah 56 foretold the time that when the Messianic temple was constructed, that at that time the eunuch and the foreigner would no longer say that they were forsaken, that they were outsiders, and the eunuch would no longer say, I am a dry tree, but they would receive a name better than sons and daughters, and they would be part of the temple of God.
Right, which is why baptism for him was such a natural conclusion, because they would undergo those washings to enter the temple. Now he's saying, I can finally be washed, I can finally be baptized and go in, you know? Um, well,
And see that whole scenario, and look, when I was raised up, when I was growing up, I would hear sermon after sermon after sermon. Now, Acts chapter 8 teaches us there are no ethnic barriers in the Lord's church. It doesn't matter if you're an Ethiopian who is probably black, doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter who you are. That is, and I believe that. I believe that's what it was teaching. Well, it probably does on maybe even a secondary or even a tertiary level. That's not the point. In the Greek, the number of times that a subject is mentioned indicates its importance in the text. Well, guess what? Ethiopian is only mentioned 3 times, I think it is. Eunuch is mentioned 5 times. His nationality did not mean one thing. The fact that he was a eunuch, which means he was a stranger, he was an outcast from the congregation of Israel, an outcast from the children of God. And as a eunuch, we have to remember this. Under the Old Covenant, children of God were produced by marrying and giving in marriage and the normal conjugal relations.
Right.
Well, guess what? As a eunuch, he can't do that. He can't produce sons of God. But now, as a eunuch, baptized into Christ, what does that mean? He can share the gospel, and those that he teaches can also be called sons of God. He can produce sons of God who are children of God by faith, not by flesh, not by the will of flesh, but by the will of God. John chapter 1, 10, 11. I mean, so this story of the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch is so powerful on so many different levels. And by the way, the book of Zephaniah plays into this, that we have already seen. Zephaniah predicted that the time was going to come in which men of, all men were going to be able to offer sacrifices in every place. Well, that's a radical change for the Messianic temple. So the idea that a eunuch could now be found within the walls, if you want to use that terminology, of the temple of God, have a name better than sons of God, sons and daughters, and produce sons of God, no longer a dry tree. No wonder he went on his way rejoicing.
Yeah, exactly.
His theological world had just gotten turned right side up. Not upside down, it had been turned right side up. And that means the Messianic temple was under construction.
And you kind of get the humor in Philip asking, do you understand what you're reading? Because the eunuch's like, no, I don't understand. They don't allow me into the assembly.
Yeah, fully understandable.
Yeah, but you're right. He's that passage is so related to the Messianic temple, and when you think about what we've done in the modern world, with our church buildings and restricting the temple of God to 101 Main Street, we've just completely taken a step backwards from how God intended it to be. Worship should be something that's a part of our everyday life, and yet we restrict it to an hour and a half or less on Sunday morning. It's quite crazy whenever you think about it.
I keep thinking of some of the incidences in my young life of how we have this bifurcated doctrine in theology. You heard, I'm sure, ministers get up and say, this building is not the temple of God. We are the people. We are the temple of God. And it's such a thrilling concept. It's such a motivating concept because if you transpose the concepts of sacred place and sacred time that the Jews attached to the temple of God under Torah, and you transpose that to us as children of God, and where Paul said in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, writing to the church, and a lot of people misunderstand this. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, he says, you are the temple of God. Well, a lot of people say that's the individual body. Sorry, that's not true. He's talking in a collective manner. Pardon me. He's talking about the corporate body of the church being the temple of God. Well, if the Jews place so much emphasis on the holiness, the sanctity of the temple as the place where God dwelt, then how much more should we today consider the sanctity and the holiness of the body of Christ? And yet I hear people constantly devalue the church, depreciate the church as a corporate body, and they try to make it all about us as individuals. And people, when I say things like this, they say, well, Don, where do you go to church? Well, I sometimes say, well, I am the church. I'm all the church I have here locally, because I have been told by different churches here in Ardmore, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome to attend and fellowship with us because you're not in fellowship with us. That doesn't mean I don't worship the Lord. That doesn't mean that I don't pray. I'm not much on singing by myself because that's kind of an agonizing experience. Or at least it would be for others. But nonetheless, I tell them, we don't have to have a church building to be the church of the living God. That's the point. And yet, my goodness gracious, different times in my experience, I mean, I preached in Seattle, Washington some years ago, and we had a great little conference. We really did. And I was starving for a drink. And I asked one of the men he wasn't from the church there, but I said, is there not a water fountain in this building? And he said, oh, heavens, no, Don. And he said, you'll notice they don't have a kitchen either. I said, well, yeah, I noticed that. And he goes, we're not allowed to bring food into this building either.
Wow.
And I was immediately like, oh, okay, I know where I'm at.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I've heard of congregations like this. I said, I'm not trying to offend anyone.
Yeah.
And of course, he wasn't of that mentality. But here's a group of people. On the one hand, they teach the church building is not the church. But they're not going to violate the, quote, sanctity of that building by bringing food in there.
Wow.
And
Dallas, Dallas told me a story about how he knew some of his relatives who went out to Yellowstone National Park on a vacation. And, there's nothing out there.
Yeah, believe you me, I've been there.
You're not going to find the One Cup No Sunday School Church of Christ out there, with Yogi Bear, So his family, a pretty large group of them, they just got together and had a worship service, Lord's Supper, sing, pray, preach. I'm sure they probably took up a contribution too, just to check off. But did you know that the local fellowships where they were from, this fellowship, that entire family, because they did not assemble with a local body of believers on Sunday? That's something.
It's staggering, and yet I can believe that. You look at the travesty and the tragedy of the legalism that has permeated the churches of Christ for so long, and still does in many venues. I'm glad to say, and you and I both know, that as a result of Dallas Burdett, a lot of that is changing in the southern states, especially because his works are very, very influential. They have a lot of outreach among those, quote, conservative churches, and even among, quote, progressives. I didn't realize for the longest time when I was growing up that I was a progressive.
Depends on who you ask. Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely did. But again, ladies and gentlemen, this gets all the way back. This brings us all the way back to the concept of the temple. You see, at the actual geographical venue of the Jerusalem temple, that's the only place you could offer sacrifice. Now, that didn't mean that you couldn't sing in your home, sing praises to Yahweh. No, it doesn't mean that. But the central exclusive place for proper worship was in that magnificent temple. And then you would go up there and you would listen to the Levites with all of their with their cymbals and their trumpets and with their singing. And boy, on the day of Sukkot, or the feast of Sukkot, the 7-day feast, must have been, and in fact, some of the ancient rabbis used to say, no one who has never seen the celebration of Sukkot at the temple in Jerusalem has never seen a joyous event.
Wow.
So it must have been astounding. I mean, the pomp and the ceremony, the lighting of the candelabras there in the courtyard. I mean, these candelabras were something like 75 feet tall.
Wow.
And it is said by the ancient sources that when all of the candelabras were lit, it lit up the entirety of Jerusalem. So this was an incredible, awesome experience, but that was it. You see, you made your journey 3 times a year if you were privileged enough and wealthy enough to do that, and you got to witness that event 3 times a year. The rest of your life was not, quote, temple oriented. Now you might pray toward the temple,
right,
and what have you, but that's not where you went. You only got to go there 3 times a year.
I heard one ministry said, Daniel, he had to open his window to pray towards the temple, in Daniel chapter 6. But since we live in the temple, since we are the temple, we can pray in any direction we please.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's an appropriate example. There is no more, having to travel or take a pilgrimage to some sacred place to worship God, because we kind of like Jacob, he said God was in this place and I did not know it, which is a pretty cool, kind of saying for us today. God is in this place, and we might not have known it before, but now we do. And that's what, being in the kingdom of God is all about. But you had to imagine that the eunuch's realization, is that they might have gone all the way to Isaiah 66,
I think they did.
In their study, about where he talks about, God can't fit into a building that you make with human hands. It had to be a joy for him to know that even though he couldn't get into that temple, that he was always in it in a way, since God is all present. God doesn't fit into a house. It's always interesting to me that the temple sort of serves as a personification or a microcosm of what the law was all about, in a way. Here's the most holy place, the holy place, where the men could go, where the women could go, then where the Gentiles could go. But unless you're born into the right family, specific tribe, specific nation, specific gender, and specific, nation in general, you couldn't get into that place where God was. And the good news of the New Testament is that that's not how it actually is. You can have the presence of God in your life regardless of any of those boundaries or borders, that we are the temple of God. And that's such a beautiful thing that the people in, for example, John 6 didn't understand. They had Jesus there, but all they could see was the physical. Give us more bread, give us more, water, like Moses gave the people. Give us freedom for our physical oppression. They couldn't see beyond to the spiritual reality of just how mind-blowing it was of what he was offering them, that true bread and that true water.
Yeah. I have said many, many times when William and I were talking about the Messianic temple, and when you and I continued with that, I have said many times in the Old Testament itself, and in that prophecy of the coming Messianic temple in Isaiah 56, which is carried forward into chapter 58 as well. But nonetheless, I've said that if we are attuned to it, and that's the issue, I've said this on many occasions. When I was growing up, I was not encouraged to read the Old Testament. I just wasn't. And even in my early ministry, I had an elder when I started preaching through the book of Judges, talking about, doing personality studies of the judges. And I'd gotten through 7 or 8 of them. I had an elder come up to me after services one night, and he goes, I want to know how much longer you're going to do that. And I said, do what? And he said, I want to know how much longer you're going to keep preaching like this on Sunday night. And I said, well, brother, there are 14 judges. I said, now some of them we don't have enough information about to do a sermon on. But I said, when I'm through with it, that's how long I'll be going. I said, why? He said, you need to stop that. I said, why? And he goes, because we're not under the Old Testament. We're under the New. We don't need to study the Old Testament. I was stunned. And I was quite beside myself, to be honest about it. And I called his name and I said, well, sir, Paul said, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. And I said, he's referring to the old covenant. So I said, since Paul believed it was really good to teach and to preach from the Old Testament, I said, I'm on pretty good ground. Oh, my goodness. Oh. That was almost a moving conversation. He flushed red, anger, and literally huffed off, walked off from me. And I'm going, did I just hear and experience that?
Yeah.
So anyway, all of that to illustrate my upbringing. When I read years and years ago, beginning to see the New Testament through a new set of eyes. Alan Bondar said, reading the New Testament through New Covenant eyes. And that's exactly what it's all about. And when I began to see on virtually every page of the New Testament, a quotation, a citation, an allusion, an echo of Old Testament prophecies, I was thunderstruck. And it was the story of the Ethiopian eunuch that caused me on one occasion. And I'll never forget this. I went over all of this in a sermon that I gave in Sydney, Australia years ago. And I made the observation when I read how Philip to preach the gospel, and I said, guess what? To preach baptism into Christ, preached from Isaiah. I said, I actually asked myself, was I capable? And of course, when I was preaching this in Sydney, I had been trying to get to that point, but I had asked myself, was I capable of preaching the gospel of Christ from the Old Testament? And when I asked myself that question the very first time, I was going, no. I didn't have a clue how to preach the gospel of Christ from the Old Testament. I had to start with Matthew and start with Acts. Because after all, everybody knows that the book of Acts is all about just giving us one example of conversion after another. Well, okay, that's true, again, on a secondary level. But the book of Acts, and this is why I taught a series of 52 lessons entitled Acts and the Restoration of Israel. When it dawned on me that Acts is really the story of the restoration of Israel and the establishment of the new covenant world of Jesus Christ, involving obviously the establishment of the church, and obviously, yes, conversion to become a member in that one body, but it's still all about the restoration of Israel. It really was transformative for me. I began to look on the church as the temple in a more powerful way than I had ever envisioned, than I'd ever imagined, really. And so to return to that story about preaching in Sydney, I was up preaching and I was talking about the eunuch. There was in the audience a Jewish lady. This Jewish lady stood 6'4". If you've ever heard the term Amazon, this woman was an Amazon. She was not fat. She was just big. And I had met her very, very briefly prior to service. I did not know she was a Jewess when I met her. But I was up preaching, and in Australia, I'm assuming it's still that way, but at the time that I was there, people in the audience feel very free to just speak up and say, let me say something here. And you're expected as a speaker to say, go for it. Okay, so I'm preaching along, and I said, the Jews believe, and I made a comment on what Jews believed. And this woman holds her hand up. I recognized her. And she goes, no, not all Jews believe that. She said, that's not the dominant view in Judaism. She said, that's kind of the liberal view. And I go, okay, well, thank you so very much for correcting me on that. I said, am I correct in saying that this is not the dominant view as you suggested, it's more the liberal view? And she said, that's correct. I said, well, okay, thank you very much for correcting me. I went on. And I began to develop the story of Isaiah 53. And I made the comment. I said, there has been in Judaism, and I said, our friend can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I said, there has been in Judaism a tremendous failure or lack of understanding of what Isaiah 53 taught. Just like the eunuch said, how can I understand? Does this man speak of himself or of someone else? And I said, that was the dominant view in my reading of early Jewish sources in rabbinic circles in the first century. And she was like, yeah, that's right. So I said, here's the issue. In Judaism, Isaiah 53 was not understood. But I said, Philip, inspired by the Holy Spirit, stood up and talked about this man who was led as a sheep to the slaughter. He did not open his mouth. By his stripes we are healed. Who shall declare his generation? He shall be declared among the living. And I said, for the very first time in the history of Judaism, Isaiah 53 was explained through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and it pointed to Jesus of Nazareth. This lady literally goes, ah!
Wow.
And sit there just like that. Just sit there, literally stunned. And finally said, I can't believe what I'm hearing. She said that out loud, something like that. And so I took that as a cue, and I preached more about the sacrifice of Jesus, the Passover lamb, the one who died in our place, and just incorporated the themes and the motifs from Isaiah 53 as it is woven and interwoven into the story of Jesus in his life. And after service was over, this has to be, without a doubt, one of the most powerful experiences in my life. I'm standing there talking with other people, and I see this Jewish woman, 6'4", coming at me like this, and I'm going, I'm going to die. And her friend who had brought her had actually come up to me prior to this and said, Don, did you know, and called her name, did you know that she was a Jewish? And I said, no, but I kind of gleaned from it from what she said during the lesson. And she goes, yes, she's a Jewish. And she said her family did not want her to come. I go, oh, wow. Well, she's big enough, she could fight the whole family if she wanted to. So, whatever. But anyway, here she comes. I mean, she's just giving it like this. And I'm thinking, okay. I extended my hand to her. She brushed my hand aside, grabbed me, and put me in a bear hug.
Wow.
And was literally just like this. And I like, finally released me, and she said, I want you to know that's the most powerful message I've heard in my life.
Wow.
I'm going to go home and tell my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad about this. And I said, I guess you know that when you do, they're not going to like it. She said, I don't care. Now, she didn't come back. So I do not know. I don't know what happened, and I've never heard what happened. All I know is this, Daniel, that this Jewish woman heard the gospel of Christ from the Tanakh for the very first time in her life. And she came to see Jesus in Isaiah 53.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It was just it almost brought tears to my eyes to talk to her and to see the emotion in her heart, in her life, as a Jewish woman, never hearing the meaning of these texts, and yet seeing so clearly in the testimony of Philip and the response of the eunuch what it really means.
Well, the only time I did that was out of rebellion. So they told me they said, stop preaching so much from the Old Testament. Start preaching from Paul. Just preach like Paul. Just preach the gospel.
Okay, sure. I'll be glad to do that.
I did. The first sermon I gave was on how Paul preached the gospel. And I noted all the citations that he would use. And then the next one I stood up and I said, I'm just going to preach the gospel like Paul. And I didn't get into the New Testament one bit. I just stayed in Isaiah. But that is a powerful story. That's a good story there.
It's one of the most outstanding examples from my ministry in which the effect of the gospel had such a palpable, visual, emotional effect on someone from the audience. It really was extremely powerful. And then for her to come up to me like she did afterwards and just about break my ribs, and express such profound appreciation. There was no resistance from her. It was all, I've got to go share this. And which isn't that what happened in the New Testament when so many of the Jews heard the gospel of Christ expounded for them from the Old Testament? What did they have to do? They had to go. They had to go tell their brothers and their sisters. Philip had to go tell Nathaniel, or vice versa. I always forget which it is. But they had to go share.
That's right.
Their hope.
They couldn't help but do.
That's exactly right. Well, okay, folks, we had originally intended to get into John chapter 6 tonight as a lead-in to the study of the Messianic temple. We did talk about the Messianic temple tonight. Hope you followed that thread of thought that we were able to share with you. So as I told Daniel before we came on the air, when I suggested that we study John 7 and 8 and the Sukkot setting, he said, well, what about John chapter 6? Shouldn't we look at that? And I said, sure. So before we came on air, I told him, I said, okay, Daniel, since you're the one that suggested that we examine John chapter 6, then you're going to discuss it for the program. Well, I kind of let him off the hook. So that won't be true for next week. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for joining us here on Two Guys in the Bible on Fulfilled Radio. Daniel, great to be with you. Happy New Year to you. And with that, I will say good night. God bless.